what did Eve see differently? Every tree was pleasant to the sight and good for food. So what is the devil now saying that she didn't already know? You see, sight is the power or the faculty of seeing, perception or view, the act of looking or beholding. And your eyes are just basically the human organ of sight. Eve, she probably walked by this same tree of good and knowledge of good and evil several times in the day.
All right.
You know, she saw it already. However, something changed this time. You see, what happened is that the devil's deception changed her perception. Hallelujah. Now in our eyes was a desire, hallelujah, for something temporal and carnal. You see, the Bible says that, you know, it was good for food. There was the lust of the flesh. It was pleasant to the eyes, the lust of the eyes. And what? A tree to be desired to make one wise. That's the pride of life. 1 John 2, chapter 2, verse 16 says, for all that is in the world is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. You see, she looked at it carnally and she was seeking immediate gratification. Remember, the tree of life was already there. It was right in the vicinity, in the midst of the garden. She bypassed that because of the devil's deception. You know, the devil will manipulate and distort our vision so that we only see what we want to see and actually then ignore the consequences. You see, what she lacked was insight, which is the ability to actually perceive and look into the situation. How can I walk past the tree every day and then this time round it looked different? So we need to check our perception first. When the devil tries to show it on a platter, we need to first look through the lens of the Holy Ghost and perceive and see, hold on a minute, no, that this don't look right. Something ain't right here. Yeah? Or are we maybe just going to go by what we see? The Bible says in verse 7 that the eyes of them both were open and they knew that they were naked. And they sewed fig leaves together and made aprons. And they heard the voice of the Lord walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And Adam and his wife, they hid themselves from the presence of the Lord God among the trees of the garden. And the Lord God called unto Adam and said unto him, where art thou? Hallelujah. You see, Adam had probably a relationship that probably we were yet to discover. I would love to be in that place before the fall.
Amen. That's right.
You see, you know, before he had sinned, you know, so what happened is, you know, as a result of this, you know, well, before God had rendezvoused with God, with Adam. They had a meeting place.
Amen.
I would imagine that at a certain day and time, God and Adam would just kind of meet up and just have a conversation about life and the universe, and who knows what they could have been talking about. But I would imagine it would have been I would have loved to eavesdrop on a conversation with God and Adam, just communing. I'm going to meet you at that spot, Adam. Same time tomorrow. Holy Ghost. You can imagine the relationship, the intimacy that they had. Hallelujah. Every time God looked at Adam, he saw himself. Adam, you look like me. But after Adam had sinned, he lost his position. Sin caused him to lose his position, both spiritually and naturally. And despite now being he was the freeholder of the earth. He was was now evicted from the presence of God.
Yes.
When God found him in sin, the thing is that he was still in the garden, but not in God's presence. That's why God called him and said, "Where are you? You can still come to church." But not be in his presence. How many times do we come to the garden? We come to the garden, but not in his presence. Hallelujah. Tuesday prayer meeting, but not in his presence. Friday youth meeting, Sunday service, convocation, all of these, but not in his presence. We come to the garden, but not his presence. And then we're wondering why I don't see revival.
Come on.
Why don't I see deliverance?
Come on.
Why don't I see these people out there getting saved? Because where's the presence? God is outside saying, I stand at the door and knock. I want to get in. God's desire from the beginning has always been to commune with man.
Hallelujah.
Make me a house so I can sit with you. So I can commune with you. He did that with the Mosaic tabernacle, and there were too many sections. David said, "You know what? Too much, man. Let me just enter into that place.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
I just want to be in your company." And we see throughout the whole Testament, and right from the beginning, instead of being with us, God wants to reside in us. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. So we've got to look at this. Yeah. God has positioned us for purpose, but what are we doing? God is so longing to be in our company. But, we find ourselves out of position and not in his presence. I had to look up the word "where," because obviously the question is, where art thou? And it means a place or position or situation, a point or end, the source or cause, a place of central interest or activity. One's true position, state, or nature. So, I started to look at this and I thought, irrespective of your age, everyone has got the potential to get lost. Yeah? And it's probably fair to say that you might find it resonates probably with us as adults even now. That we're probably likely to get lost more times as an adult than we did a kid. Maybe because we had adult supervision and we were kind of restricted, parents kind of kept a close eye. Has anyone been lost in the car?
Yes.
I do a lot of mileage and sometimes, I see a few hands going up. But sometimes we find ourselves, there are so many reasons as to why we get lost. Sometimes we can't see where we're going. Like it's dark outside. Sometimes it's because the darkness. Sometimes it's we can't see where we're going. Sometimes it's because we didn't get the correct directions. We were misguided. We took a wrong turn, but guess what? We continued in error. How many times have we taken a wrong turn, but continued with the hope that I'm going to get round? I'm going to find a U-turn somewhere. I'm continuing to go down here. But that's the problem with sin, is that it takes you further than you wanted to go. The price is more than you wanted to pay. Hallelujah. Hallelujah, Jesus. Sometimes we don't read the signs. And we get lost. And when you look at that picture that you've got up there, you can see on the phone that you've got 2 points. There is a place, there is a space between one of them and the destination. And I check that with my sat-nav. I rely heavily on my sat-nav to guide me to the right place. And I thought about the question, where art thou? Now, you wouldn't ask the question, where are you, if the person is close to you or in the vicinity.
That's right.
There's got to be some kind of significant distance or space for that question to be asked. If I'm right beside the person, I would never ask them. I'm sure some of us have had some friends where, we've, like God and Adam, God had a designated place and a designated time, and they weren't at the place or at the time. So what did you do? You pick up the phone and call them and ask them, where are you? Yeah, we're supposed to meet. So the word, so I looked at that, and I thought lost means to be unable to find one's way or not knowing one's whereabouts. So it's similar to words like, astray or go off course, off track or off the right track, or even go adrift or go around in circles. Sometimes we don't know our whereabouts. And have you felt sometimes like, you don't know where you are or where you're supposed to be and how you're going to get there? And sometimes we might feel like that in our walk. As Christians, sometimes we may not be able to find our way. At times in our Christian walk, this happens because we've continued in the wrong direction. And God is calling us back. But we don't even know if we're coming or going. Sometimes it feels like we're going around in circles. Amen. And Satan is trying to shift us out of our position and away from the presence of God to deprive us from fulfilling God's purpose in our lives. There were others in the Bible that kind of lost their way too, or their position. Saul lost his position. He was the first king, but he lost his position to David because of disobedience. Jonah, he moved from his position. Instead of going to Nineveh, he went to Tarshish. He was out of position. He was out of order. He wasn't in his place. To the contrary, though, it's interesting. We see the Apostle Paul. Paul found his way, but first he had to actually lose his sight in order to see the Lord. And then God actually then positioned him for purpose. Hallelujah. Glory to God. And then we look at, Galatians. It says that he was appointed by God. He was by divine appointment. Yes, sir. So sometimes you've got to look at where we're at today. God is calling us today saying, where are you? Track his voice. Hallelujah. Track his voice.